What's up, duelists? Today's video is going to be a little bit different from your regularly scheduled duel programming. Today, we're going to be talking about Blackwings. This is the ultimate Blackwing guide video. Before we get into things, make sure and leave a like, leave a comment. These videos take a little bit more work than just queuing up a deck and destroying an opponent. So, you know, just show me you appreciate it. Show me you vibe with it. Also, before we get started in the video, I just want to remind you guys we have a tournament coming up on January 29th. You're not going to want to miss that. So definitely check out the Discord link in the description below. It's going to be a double elimination tournament. It's going to be free entry. There will be a cash prize. So make sure and stay tuned for stuff regarding that. Blackwings are an aggressive deck that are both versatile and resilient and have a ton of burst potential. It's an indisputable high-tier threat for any deck or any player to face. It won our first major tournament last year in Edison Legends with over 100 players, and it's continued to top tournaments ever since. If you're going to be playing in a tournament and you're not playing Blackwings in Edison format, you should be prepared to play them in at least one or more of your rounds, as they make up approximately 15 to 20% of the metagame. The first thing to understand about Blackwings is the core strategy of the deck. Blackwings is a hyper-aggressive deck that is both resilient and versatile. The monsters are definitely pushed in terms of power level when compared to other monsters at the time period. Very few of them have any sort of downside effect, and all of their effects combo very, very nicely together and reward you for playing the game in an aggressive fashion. The hallmark starters of the deck, Sirocco the Dawn and Shura, punish your opponent for playing monsters or committing to the field. Sirocco allows you to summon it with no tribute when your opponent controls a monster and you do not. Sirocco also has the added effect of piling all of the attack points of all of your Blackwing monsters onto one body once per turn. This can be useful for gang attacking a larger monster that you have trouble dealing with. Shura punishes your opponent's commitments by special summoning monsters from the deck when they are destroyed by battle with this card. This couples nicely with Sirocco's pump effect, as well as with Gale and Kalut, the two supporting monsters that allow you to strengthen up your monsters as well as weaken your opponents, without having to use your normal summon on these cards. Kalut is a very dangerous card. The hand is a very difficult part of the game to interact with in Edison format. Most strategies will have trouble getting rid of Kaluts before they have a chance to activate their effect. Kaluts can also be used in multiples, or as a way to push through lethal damage on a direct attack. Gale is a 3-star tuner that's limited in this format that you can special summon from your hand as long as you control a different Blackwing name. Gale's effect is particularly effective at removing large monsters. It allows you to once per turn target a face-up monster your opponent controls and have its stats permanently. This can be used repeatedly on the same monster, turn after turn, or it can be used to help your Shura run over something, or it can be used to just clear a 2000 defender that's in your way. It's a very versatile card, and on top of that, it's a tuner and allows you to make one of the better synchro monsters in the deck, Blackwing Armor Master, as well as Blackwing Armed Wing if paired with Kalut. Blackwing Bora the Spear is a burst card in this deck, and allows you to get really, really aggressive, especially with Sirocco pumps and Kalut pumps. Bora can be special summoned from the hand if you control a different Blackwing name, and it inflicts piercing damage. Oftentimes, Sirocco Bora can lead to games ending in just 2 or 3 turns, so this is a very fearsome combination that you have to be careful of when facing this deck. Normally, hyper-aggressive decks in the past have struggled with middle to late game burnout. For Blackwings, this is not necessarily the case. Blackwing Blizzard the Far North, Blackwing Value the Emblem of Honor, and Black Whirlwind allow you to keep up the aggression well throughout the middle and late game portions. Black Whirlwind is a continuous spell card that lets you search a Blackwing monster with less attack than the one you normal summon. This card allows you to stream all of your monsters straight out of your deck into your hand in succession, provided you start with a strong enough monster. This is a terrifyingly powerful spell card and has ended many games just by being activated on the first turn of the game. Blackwing Blizzard the Far North has a built-in Monster Reborn effect for level 4 or lower Blackwings. Blackwing Blizzard is also one of the few cards in the deck with a very noticeable downside. It cannot be special summoned, but that's kind of a small price to pay for the power of getting an auto +1 on the summon and being a tuner. Blackwing Blizzard the Far North being a 2-star tuner gives you access to the 2 most powerful synchro cards in Edison format, which are Bryonic and yugioh Guardian. The fact that it can also make Blackwing Armed Wing is pretty massive for this deck as well. What Value does is you can banish it with a Blackwing non-tuner monster and summon a Blackwing synchro monster from your extra deck equal to the levels of the combined monsters. In layman's terms, it means you can banish it with Sirocco or Armed Wing or Armor Master to special summon an extra synchro later in the game. This is particularly powerful because the banish is not a cost, so you can repeatedly activate this effect even if your opponent is to negate it with something like Royal Oppression or Divine Wrath. Vayu's main staying power in the mid to late game often comes up when it is special summoned from Shura in the early game and then lingers or is sent to the graveyard and gives you an extra extender later on. The last monster in the deck is Dark-Armed Dragon. Dark-Armed Dragon is undoubtedly one of the most powerful boss monsters in the format. It gives you upwards of an auto +3 for free, and this deck has a decent enough amount of grave control between the one copy of Vayu and Blizzard that you can consistently build a game plan around this, provided you draw it, and steal tons of games with it. As far as support spells and traps go, generally speaking, you're going to see Allure of Darkness to help improve the consistency and see Black Whirlwind more often, Heavy Storm to clear large back rows, Brain Control to turn up the jets, maybe go for lethal, or to make crazy synchro plays. Oftentimes you'll have Book of Moon to protect your own summons, as well as run over your opponent's monsters using Shura or Bora. And most notably, you'll have 3 copies of Icarus Attack. This is a card that's played in basically every Blackwing deck as a 3 of. It's the most versatile removal in the format, and it's not even at a disadvantage. The only thing you lose by playing this card, generally speaking, is a normal summon. However, since most of the Blackwing monsters can be special summoned from your hand, or special summon via effects like Blizzard, or Vayu, or Shura, you'll have plenty of free bodies to tribute for your 2 targeted destructions. Icarus Attack is also one of the most versatile removal spells in the format because it not only hits monsters, but spell and traps as well, making it modal Heavy Storm or Treacherous Trap Hole oftentimes. For sideboarding, these are some of the more common choices you'll see, but of course, sideboarding definitely changes based on the metagame and what people are playing. Oftentimes, however, you will see DD Crow, Cyber Dragon, Fossil Dyna, as well as Deck Devastation Virus, and some number of additional removal spells. Gates. For Blackwing Synchro monsters, the one that's most notable is Blackwing Armor Master. This card cannot be destroyed by battle, and you take no battle damage from attacks involving this card. Also, at the end of the damage step, if you attacked into a monster with it, you can place a wedge counter on it if that monster survived. Then, you can remove all wedge counters from your opponent's monster, and make that monster a 0 attack and defense monster until the end of the turn. This card makes it so that in late game situations, if your opponent is outmuscling you somehow between the Shuras, Kalutes, and Sirocco pumps and Gale Having and everything, you can go into this monster and wall them out, all while you're slowly picking off their creatures by putting wedge counters on it. It's a very dangerous monster and a very, very power-crept synchro compared to the other stuff legal in the format. Like I mentioned earlier, Blackwings won our first major tournament. I think we should take a look at Topher 702's Blackwing list to see his configuration and how he decided to approach this deck. You'll notice in Topher 702's Blackwing build, he decided to trim down on copies of Blizzard, Bora, and Sirocco, while including copies of Cyber Dragon in the main, Thunder King in the main, and a Chaos Sorcerer. He also elected to cut a lot of the mainstay trap cards and include copies of Upstart Goblin to see cards like Black Whirlwind as early as possible. I think this list was a phenomenal choice for the metagame. I think it has a lot of synergies built into itself, and it is even more aggressive given the free summons in Cyber Dragon and Chaos Sorcerer than the stock Blackwing builds. For the sideboarding, at the time, the most popular decks were Blackwing and Gladiator Beasts. You'll notice 2 copies of Starlight Road in the sideboard, as well as 2 copies of My Body as a Shield. These come in the mirror match, as they can be blowouts against Heavy Storm and Icarus Attack. My Body as a Shield also protects you from things like Trap Hole, Bottomless Trap Hole, Mirror Force, Torrential Tribute, etc. in the mirror match. Snowman Eater is another card that can also come in the mirror match. They will be forced to throw resources at this, whether it be a Kalute or a Sirocco or something in order to clear it out of the way, and then you will regain initiative as well as board positioning after your Snowman Eater has gained its advantage. You'll notice that Topher elected to sideboard his copies of Bottomless Trap Hole instead of maining them. One thing that I find is interesting is that Bottomless Trap Hole is much better when you're going first than it is when you're going second. If your opponent has already summoned a monster and you draw Bottomless Trap Hole, it's going to look a little silly. Last but not least, I would like to comment on his decision to sideboard Trap Dust Shoot and Mind Crush. While Trap Dust Shoot is quintessentially an FTK in a lot of positions in this format, in the mirror match and Gladiator Beast matchups, it is dead very often past turn 1. Oftentimes, Blackwing mirror matches get down to top decking situations very early on, because things will trade like an Icarus Attack will trade for 2 cards, their Icarus Attack will trade for 2 cards, all of a sudden both players are on 2 cards. And Trap Dust Shoot is a terrible top deck in those situations. Gladiator Beasts play very low monster count, so not only is there a high percentage chance for Trap Dust Shoot to miss in that matchup, but again, they set a lot of back row, and then your Trap Dust Shoot is all of a sudden dead for the rest of the game. I think this list was very well tuned for the metagame that it was going into. Congratulations to Topher are definitely in order for this. The most recent top with Blackwings has been Fufo's list in the EdisonFormat.com 1K event. Fufo took this list to third place. This list looks a little bit more similar to the stock list we started with. However, Fufo has decided to include 1 extra copy of Vayu and 2 copies of Fossil Dyna Pachycephalo. The metagame right now has largely swung more towards Diva Heroes, Frogs, and Dragons. Fossil Dyna Pachycephalo is very good in those matchups. However, this card is embarrassingly bad against Gladiator Beasts and Blackwings. So it makes sense that in the meta shift that has happened in the last few months, that this card is the go-to stun card as opposed to something like Thunder King Ryo in the main. You'll notice that Fufo has adopted the 2 copies of Dark Bribe as a way to protect his back row, and he's opted not to main deck Starlight Road, as to not conflict with his Royal Oppressions. Another noticeable cut in Fufo's list is Allure of Darkness. Normally that card is used to increase consistency to find Black Whirlwind early on. In Fufo's sideboard, he's got a very interesting suite of Floodgate traps between Skill Drain, Rivalry, and Mask of Restrict. While Mask of Restrict can conflict with Icarus Attack and occasionally Sirocco, oftentimes when you are bringing it in against decks like Monarchs, they physically cannot play the game if it's in play, so it's not too bad if your Icarus attacks are shut off in this instance. Also, Monarch decks tend to commit very little to the field, in which case your Icarus attacks are not that good to begin with. Blackwings are one of the coolest decks at playing into Floodgates and playing Floodgates as well. They can keep up aggression under Gozen, Rivalry, Skill Drain, Royal Oppression, Mask of Restrict, you name it. All of the continuous trap cards in the format stands like Gravity Bind. Blackwings have an easy time not only dealing with, but playing in their own deck as well. In post-board games, it makes them very dangerous because they get to play the best trap card against your deck at any given situation, and you have to have an answer to that while having an answer to these hyper-aggressive monsters beating your face in a few short turns. Fufo opted to side 2 copies of Nobleman and Mind Control. I think this is a concession to more players playing Quick Draw now. Mind Control is a very interesting card in this deck, as it sort of doubles as a 3rd copy of Knock and a 2nd copy of Brain Control, but it's not quite as aggressive as either of those, and you do need a tuner to truly convert off of it. While it's not the hardest thing to find a tuner in this deck, it can sometimes be a little bit of an overcommitment to use Mind Control and summon a tuner and get blown out 2 for 1 by a single back row. Both Fufo and Topher702 were citing 2 copies of Deck Devastation Virus. I think this card is very important in one of the deck's worst matchups, which is Fairies. Speaking of worst matchups, let's get into some of the weaknesses that Blackwings have. Here are a few cards that I want to talk about in regards to Blackwing matchups in general. The cards up here I think are phenomenal cards against Blackwings, and these are cards that most, if not all decks can sideboard. One of the ways you can approach Blackwings is by floodgating them out. There are only 2 floodgates that really affect Blackwings, and that would be Consecrated Light and Royal Decree. Most Blackwing decks are playing somewhere between 9 and 15 trap cards. Royal Decree shuts off a quarter to more of their deck. If your deck's not playing any trap cards, you can get a +2 or +3 very easily out of this, especially if you chain it to an Icarus attack and get them to tribute a monster as well. However, you do have to be careful. If your opponent has a monster heavy draw, they can OTK you very easily and you'll have no traps to protect yourself from this. Consecrated Light is another sort of soft floodgate against this monster. You can set it pretty easily, and they'll have trouble running it over. However, it does get blown out of the water by Deck Devastation and Icarus Attack, so you have to be a little careful of this. Another way they can deal with this is by Book of Mooning it and summoning a Synchro monster. If you can have parries for both Synchro monsters and Icarus Attack while sticking a Consecrated Light, you should have no trouble beating this deck. One thing that we discussed when talking about Topher702's list is Snowman Eater, and by extension I'd like to talk about Jujitsu Master as well. These 2 cards do a very good job of stunting the aggressive advancements from Blackwings. Shura does not attack favorably into either of these monsters, and will need to spend a Kalut to trade 2 for 1 with either of them. Even a Sirocco attacking into one of these is a pretty huge setback for the Blackwing deck. Removing a Blackwing's monsters has the hidden upside of turning off their Icarus attacks and Black Whirlwind. Oftentimes, Blackwing players are not going to be siding out Icarus Attack and Black Whirlwind in post-board games. However, the hidden downside of these cards is that they do nothing when you don't have a monster. You can sometimes get a lot of pseudo +1s by just overloading on spot removal and committing one thing to the board at a time. That's why I've included DD Warrior Lady, Bottomless Trap Hole, Dimensional Prison, and Smashing Ground here. Removing a Blackwing player's only monster is a good way to net pseudo advantages here and there. Additionally, Starlight Road is a good way to get an auto +2 against an Icarus attack. There is oftentimes very little they can do after this resolves. They will lose a monster, you'll get a Stardust for free, they'll lose their back row, and that's just an insurmountable advantage that they have to be very careful of when using Icarus attack in games 2 and 3. My body as a shield to an extent has the same effect as Starlight Road with some added speed. It's a little bit better going second than Starlight Road because you can obviously play it on the first turn into back row, but the life point cost is something to definitely be careful of. Life point cost in general is something I wanted to touch on. Cards like Brain Control, 7 Tools of the Bandit, and Solemn Judgment, while they are very powerful cards, they come with a very real added cost of losing life. Between Sirocco Pumps, Armed Wing Pierce, Bora Pierce, Kaloot Pumps, bursting out tons of monsters into play, the list goes on and on. Blackwings is very, very good at dealing a lot of damage very, very quickly. Paying life for a 1-for-1 trade is oftentimes positionally a mistake against the deck in early game situations. Definitely be careful when using these 3 cards and My Body as a Shield as well. Before I mentioned Blackwings getting into top decking situations very frequently, that's why I think Trap Dust Shoot is a bit of a trick in this matchup that may trip you up. Yes, Trap Dust Shoot taking their only monster can be, game winning. However, sometimes they'll set 4 and then the Trap Dust Shoot is dead the rest of the game, and it makes for a poor top deck in top decking situations. Alternatively, I think something like Mind Crush is actually quite good against the deck. The opponent doesn't need to have a lot of cards in hand for Mind Crush to be live, and is one of the few ways to interact with Kaloot, and can net you a tricky 2-for-1 on a risky attack from the opponent. Shadow Imprisoning Mirror is a bit of a trick as well. I don't think this card affects Blackwings all that much. It only shuts off Blizzard, Sirocco Pumps, Shura activation, Gale activation, and the Vayu activation in Grave. But it doesn't necessarily stop your opponent from swarming the board or activating Kaloot in hand. And these are largely the ways the Blackwing deck kills you anyway. It's also something that sits on the field and doesn't trade equitably with a monster, but gives them a nice juicy target for their Icarus attacks. The only time I would recommend siding this card in is if you actively have it in your sideboard for another matchup, and you have a card that is bad enough to take out against Blackwings. The last card that I wanted to mention is Cyber Dragon. While I think Cyber Dragon is very good against Blackwings, you do have to be careful of Royal Oppression. Blackwings is the best Royal Oppression deck in the format, and having counterplay for that is important if you're going to be overloading on special summons like Cyber Dragon. If your deck is a deck that isn't hurt by Oppression, oftentimes Blackwings will be siding out their Royal Oppressions. I think this is when Cyber Dragon is at its best against the matchup. Next, I'm going to show you guys a few other options that I've seen in Blackwing decks over the years. Up here are some options that I think are genuinely fairly strong, given the build, or have high upside to be build-arounds. And down here, I think are some gimmicky options, but can be cute or fun to play with. There are definitely lists that capitalize more on the graveyard aspect of Vayu. I've seen things like 1 Dark Grepher included, or 1 Armageddon Knight included with 2 copies of Vayu, as well as playing Return from the Different Dimension. This card obviously leads to a lot of OTKs, being an army in a can, with Sirocco's pump effect. However, it's a little slow and conflicts with your own Royal Oppressions, so it's not played as often as the other cards. I've seen lists play Gravekeeper Spy and Legendary Jujitsu Master in the main as defensive options in the mirror match. However, I think these are largely meta dependent. Same thing for Raiko. They are defensive cards and don't contribute to your proactive, aggressive game plan in most matchups. I have seen some lists play Caius the Shadow Monarch as a tech card. I don't think this is the worst tech card, but oftentimes you'll have to be tributing a Blackwing monster to summon your Caius, and it's very hard to imagine a situation where you'd rather have a Caius in play than a Blackwing monster and threaten Icarus attack. There are some packages in decks I've seen with Sangan and Torrential Tribute. Fufo was notably playing Torrential Tribute, but with no Sangan. I think Torrential Tribute is a bit of a trap in this deck. You generally want to keep your monsters in play to keep your Icarus attacks alive, or to keep the pressure up on your opponent. However, if you're playing cards like Sangan and maybe even Doomcaliber Knight, Torrential Tribute's not too bad, because you can initiate some positions in openings and early game situations where it's actively pretty good for you to activate. Gorz the Emissary of Darkness is a phenomenal card in this format. It stops you from getting OTK'd. However, in decks with lots of continuous spell and traps, it's very difficult for this card to be live, especially if you're the deck who's being the aggressor 99% of the time. If you're not being attacked, if you have stuff sticking to your board, it's maybe not the best pick to main deck. However, this card does win games, and I've seen it played before in this deck. One thing players like to do against Blackwings is play around Icarus attack by only committing 1 monster or 1 spell and trap to the field at a time. I think Smashing Ground and Dust Tornado are interesting sort of counterplays or metagames to players who are committing only 1 thing at a time. I've seen players use this before, and I've actually lost a fair bit of games to Blackwing players playing Smashing Ground and Dust Tornado in the main because I was playing around Icarus attack and committed too little and got OTK'd. I've seen builds cutting Dark Arm Dragon and adding Solidarity, as well as playing stuff like Rivalry and Gozen in the main deck. These cards are all noticeably powerful. However, it does weaken up your deck a lot more to monster spot removal. Solidarity is essentially a -1 that doesn't contribute to your game plan. Most of your monsters are strong enough to attack over anything anyway. However, Solidarity does give you some nasty plays with Eradicator Epidemic Virus and Deck Devastation Virus, so it's definitely worth considering when building your Blackwing deck. Doom Caliber Knight is a nice starter. If you expect a lot of Jujutsu Master, Snowman Eater, or Raiko, I think this card trades pretty favorably with them, and it's also an allure target. This card is also very good against Gladiator Beasts, which is a deck that could be the most popular deck of a weekend, and I could see Doom Caliber Knight rising to the top in that situation for options you'd like to select. I think Trap Hole and 7 Tools of the Bandit are interesting choices for the mirror match. Trap Hole is just an additional spot removal that prevents Black Whirlwind from activating. When a Blackwing monster is normal summoned, Black Whirlwind needs to check its attack on resolution. So if the monster is booked or removed from the field before Black Whirlwind resolves, then you won't be able to search a monster because the attack points cannot be checked on resolution. By extension, I think Trap Jammer is another interesting option. While being fringe, it's kind of cute and doesn't have the same life point cost as 7 Tools of the Bandit. Last but not least, I've seen some Blackwing decks play Fiendish Chain and Call of the Haunted. I think these cards are both interesting in certain situations. Fiendish Chain is good in Monarch-filled metagames, I think, and Call of the Haunted is very good if you think Oppression's not going to be great in your main deck. As far as some of the fringe option goes, you could play some wind monsters like Ryza and Miss Valley Soldier alongside Swallow's Nest to play something like Dark Simorgh. I think this is ultimately not good because Icarus Attack just does the same thing that Dark Simorgh wants to do by preventing your opponent from setting too many cards into it anyway. Mistral the Silver Shield is a 2-star tuner that you can get with Shura. However, it's a total brick if you draw it, and very lackluster. I've seen some lists, particularly with Armageddon Knight and Dark Rever, play the Dark Creator. I think those lists are better off playing Royal Oppression than cards like this that require you to have no monsters in play to summon. Phoenix Wing Windblast is a card I've seen some players use, as well as Threatening Roar. I think Threatening Roar was better in older metagames when Lightsworns were at full power and Rescue Cat was at full power and you just needed to stop the OTK. Edison format, there's a lot less OTK stuff going on. Your equitable removal is going to be much more impactful than Threatening Roar in these instances. A few interesting things that I want to touch on are Magic Cylinder. I think this is a good card for the mirror match because oftentimes the games turn into top decking situations with low life points, and a top deck Magic Cylinder can steal a game that you otherwise would be losing. Delta Crow Anti-Reverse, to a degree, is another card that I might consider for the mirror match as a 4th copy of Icarus Attack. However, I think this card is quite bad because it requires you to already have a Blackwing monster in play. Delta Crow is at its best in Game 1, when your opponent might be lighter on monster removal than they are in Games 2 and 3, but if your monster gets removed, all of a sudden your Delta Crow is a dead card, and that's kind of not where you want to be in post-board situations with Blackwings. Now, the question everyone has been waiting for. Where do I see Blackwings in the metagame moving forward? Edison format has this sort of meta cycle where decks will adopt floodgates and then decks will slim down on their combo heavy extreme cards and add more spot removal, and then decks will prey on the spot removal by adding more extreme cards and getting more combo heavy and having more extenders, and then it cycles back to the floodgate heavy lists. Right now, I think we're kind of in the cycle where floodgates are very popular. We saw a lot of floodgates and a lot of sort of lockout cards in the last major tournament, which was the EdisonFormat.com 1K. What does this mean for Blackwings? Honestly, probably not much. We won't see much variation in Blackwing decks moving forward, other than the slight deviations here and there on what tech floodgate monsters or tech floodgate trap cards to use. I could see maybe a resurgence in Gravekeeper Spy, as it does play pretty well into spot removal, or maybe something like Sangan, but it's really hard to tell. I think another card we will be seeing a lot of moving forward in the side deck of Blackwing decks is Pulling the Rug. This card is really good against the very, very popular Diva Hero deck that has kind of taken the metagame by storm. Diva Heroes slowly started out with its, I say slowly, but it was a pretty breakout win, or second place in Edison Legends, and it's top 4 every tournament since. It had a dominating performance at the EdisonFormat.com 1K, and I don't think that the deck is going anywhere. The deck plays a lot of cards that trade very ineffectively with Pulling the Rug. You've got Deep Sea Diva, Caius the Shadow Monarch, and Stratos, which all walk into Pulling the Rug without value. Absolute Zero is definitely a problem for every deck once it's resolved, so I'm curious to see what Blackwing players will do to handle a resolved Absolute Zero moving forward. With regards to the other matchups in the metagame, I think Lightsworn and Fairies are picking up a little bit in popularity, as well as Quick Draw, and we see Gladiator Beasts decreasing in popularity a little bit more. With the increase in popularity in Lightsworn and Fairies, we could expect to see things like Light Imprisoning Mirror from the Blackwing deck, or more copies of Deck Devastation Virus and Skill Drain, which also overlap in the Quick Draw matchup. If there's anything you guys have been trying out in your Blackwing decks you think I'm totally missing here, and it's working out for you, let me know in the comments below. I'm interested to see what you guys have come up with to combat this current metagame with Blackwings. Hopefully this video helped you guys understand the Blackwing deck a little bit better and showed you some of the options that you could be considering for your build. Make sure and like and subscribe. Thanks for the love, everyone. Really appreciate it. Peace out.